really excited today to have Sarah Perry with us. She is a licensed professional clinical counselor and supervisor, and she is going to be talking to us today about something that we all need to know about. That is how we can best support kids and youth with anxiety. So, Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be a part of this.
We are thrilled to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I actually, for the last, almost 7 years now, have been working in a nonprofit agency, working with mainly children and adolescents and in the school setting. I help coordinate some mental health and alcohol and drug prevention programming that we do there. And then I've also done outpatient counseling, so working with folks of all ages, families, teens, children, adults. And prior to the last 7 years, for 5 years, I worked primarily with individuals on the autism spectrum.
How common of an issue is anxiety with children and teens?
It's very, very common. And I would say because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing things now manifest in different ways that are more pronounced than even before the pandemic, obviously. I think all of us have been going through a significant trauma collectively, and we may not always see it as that because it's not something that just happened at one time to us. But as a result, kids have parents who are more stressed than usual, and therefore that impacts the whole family unit and dynamic, and that just kind of bleeds over. So we're all going through and on the tail end of getting through a trauma. We're still surviving it, really. Yeah. So I think we're going to continue to see more things coming in the next few years as a result of all this.
Should people expect that there may be some anxiety once they start reintroducing back into normal routines? Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So I think, especially with one of the things I saw, having the opportunity to be in the schools and being with them in each phase, both in total distance learning and then in a hybrid learning situation and then fully back in, we had kids that ended up struggling again with kind of attachment anxiety, so not wanting to leave their caregivers. And so I think whether that's school or not, just coming out of a quarantine when kids have been with their primary attachment figures, and if you hear that in the background, that's my dog, I apologize. But if they've been with their primary attachment figures during this whole time and been told it's only safe, right, to be with those people that are in their family or that already live with them, it's hard to flip a switch all of a sudden, right? And that's true for adults and kids, but adults have a better understanding of that than kids do. Kids are very black and white in their thinking and may not have as much of an understanding of why all of a sudden it's now okay to be in public again or to do these things. And so I think we're seeing what we saw with initial reentry and even continuing after kids went from hybrid back to fully in, was just more kind of concerns about going back to school refusal, refusing to do hobbies and things that they normally would want to, or on the flip side, wanting to get really involved. And so the other part with that too is, in addition to the attachment piece, just kids aren't necessarily going to be able to label that they're anxious, right? So it might come across as more physical signs, tummy aches, headaches, and not understanding how to express what it is that they're feeling. A lot of us going through this, I think, haven't really known how to express some of what we were experiencing, not understanding even that it was anxiety or, nervousness or fear.
Yeah. I want to touch on that for a moment. So a lot of times we have this preconceived notion that anxiety looks like a tummy ache or withdrawn or fearful, but can anxiety be expressed in different ways that we may not recognize as anxiety?
Temper tantrums, clinginess, refusal to do certain things that might just look like opposition, are typically can be signs of both anxiety and depression in kids. One of the other things too is irritability. So we tend to think of depression and anxiety looking different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for kids and teenagers, it really can look like irritability as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like my brain and my body just doesn't have the capacity to deal with one more thing.
I
So
feel
it
like
comes
that a
across
lot.
as irritating.
I
Yeah, it's very common
Yeah.
for a lot of us adults right now as
Yeah,
well.
right.
Kids just don't know how to express it as
Yeah.
well with their feelings.
What should parents and teachers
Yeah.
be looking out for?
You know, in the mental health world, when we're diagnosing a anxiety disorder, if you will, we're looking for a significant change in the areas of their social functioning, school functioning, and academic and or just daily living things. So if we're seeing a huge shift for more than like a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, or just having hard days, but if it's lasting for more than, it's getting to a couple of weeks, and their behavior is significantly changing from what they used to be like, and that's what we call they're kind of deviating from their baseline behavior. And so that would be something to look for as, okay, well, this isn't just a phase, right? This is something that's continuing. Younger kids, again, because they don't really know how to express it as much, are going to tend to act out more.
Mm-hmm.
So that might look like increased temper tantrums, right? Or clinginess. It might also look like I said, refusal to do certain things, go to new places, try new things. One of the things that I have noticed more frequently and surprised me actually in coming out of this pandemic or starting to come out of this pandemic is kids with more magical thinking. So magical thinking is kind of a developmentally appropriate thing. However, what I am noticing is that kids are almost having it's almost obsessive compulsive, like magical thinking. So if I do this, then I can control this from happening. The whole, if I step on a crack, I'll break my mother's back, right? But in their minds, like, well, if I do this little ritual, or I do this little thing, then I can keep XYZ from happening. I'm seeing more of that in some of our older elementary age kiddos, having little rituals and things they feel like they have to do. And I think some of that's because of control, right? Feeling out of control in their outside world. So they're trying to create, the brain is trying to overcompensate and create. So I've seen some of that. But any changes, major changes in sleeping, eating, if suddenly their sleep schedule is just way off, and it's not just because they, changed their routine with school or, again, it's looming into a couple weeks.
If you're a parent or you're a teacher or a church volunteer and you notice a child who has magical thinking, what's the best way to approach that?
Yeah. So I think really, first of all, getting to the child on their level, right? So getting down to their eye contact level, joining them so they don't feel that power difference, so to speak, but getting on their level. And then, so literally getting on their level. And then, joining with them, asking them more about what that thought is. So, if I think if I can do something and this will make XYZ better, I would say, can you tell me a little bit more about what happens when you do that or when you think that thought? Or what do you notice in your body when you're having that thought?
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of asking them what they think, because you'll usually be able to see a link between a control piece, right? Well, if I try to do this, then I must be, I can control an aspect of my environment, or I can control something.
I think as a parent, it can be really easy for your first instinct if your child says, well, if I don't step on any cracks, then I'm going to have a good day at school or something, to say that was silly. But how important is it to meet them where they are, even if it's something you weren't expecting or you think in the moment isn't important?
Yeah. Well, the most important thing to remember is perspective is everything, right? So I might know something is irrational, but when we're dealing with our feelings, there's really no feeling that is wrong or bad.
Right.
It may not be rational or truthful, right? And we can get to that point eventually, but first we have to validate and normalize it's okay to feel that way. And I don't understand, maybe, making a comment that I've even heard kids say, well, I know this is a silly thought, but this is what's in my head. right? And then what they really need, what they're really saying with that, what they're really asking you but not saying is, help me fix this, help me feel not weird anymore, right? And so being able to validate and say, you know, it's okay to have lots of different thoughts and feelings, and sometimes we don't understand them, right? Sometimes we can have multiple feelings at one time, and they're not right or wrong, it's just how you feel right now. So let's kind of work on it together to figure out what's causing those feelings. And for older kids, I would say, you know, especially teenagers, they really need validation first and then correction, right? So help me understand, you know, and be honest, because they will know, they will call you on your crap. They know when you're trying too hard or making things up. So just being honest and saying, you know, help me understand. I want to understand. I can see that that's really hard for you to feel that way, and I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Can you help me understand or explain to me a little bit what that looks like to you, instead of automatically writing them off as wrong or irrational.
Yeah, that's really good. I think anytime anyone feels understood and they feel validated, is easier to continue with conversation either then or in the future.
Yeah, and so something that's really 3 kind of R's to remember, and this comes from Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a neuropsychiatrist, and if anybody's heard of the neurosequential model of education or psychiatry therapy, the 3 R's. So you really need to regulate, relate, reason, right? So if your child is really upset, we know that only a emotionally and physically regulated adult can help regulate a dysregulated child, or a out of sync child, if you will. So the first is to regulate. So if you see them physically experiencing extreme emotions or feelings, right, doing something with them to regulate, going for a walk, you know, just getting movement going, taking some deep breaths together, things like that. And then relate. So like I said, you know, that seems like that was really hard. Can you help me understand? Or I really want to understand. Can you tell me more about that? And then you can get to reasoning, to the rational point. And part of that's because when we are in a dysregulated or overreactive state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's responsible for rational thought and reasoning, problem solving, logic, it's offline. So when emotion has taken over, logical thought, that part of our brain that's responsible for that is going to be offline and not accessible. So that's why you have to first regulate the body, regulate the brain, calm it down, show that you're a safe person to be with by relating to them in a healthy way, and then you can get to the reasoning.
Can you give us an example of how you can help a child regulate their emotions at home? Or we're also having people watch this who are ministry volunteers and leaders at church, something that they could help a child regulate even at a church situation.
Yeah, so I think movement's always really good. What we know is that bilateral stimulation or back and forth movement can be very calming to the brainstem, and then as a result, calm the body. So that's why I said getting up and doing something that is like going for a quick walk and breathing, going for a walk to get a drink of water and walking back, right? So if you see them physically escalating, you know, within a safe space, being able to walk and do that. The other thing is too, having them use some kind of fidget or tapping, drumming, you know, practice air drums or whatever. That kind of back and forth movement can be helpful. If you have a kiddo who's really upset, even just you kind of swaying back and forth can activate their mirror neurons. So as they're looking at you, they will start to kind of, and a lot of times they won't even notice they're doing it. But just that movement itself can be calming.
That's why we do the rocking.
Yeah, babies. Exactly. So the other thing I like to do too is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. It's very simple. So you pick the first 5 things, you name a color, the first 5 blue things that you see. And then you focus on the next 4 things that you can touch, and you describe what they feel like. So I touch this water bottle, or I touch my phone. And then you would do 3 things that you can hear. Stop. Really kind of tune into what you hear in the background, right? And then 2 things that you can smell. So if, I have my coffee, so I'm going to smell that, and I would explain what it smelled like. And then the next one would be taste. So if you have something like a mint or gum that they can taste and focus, that's fine. And if not, you can have them imagine what their favorite food tastes like. And so it seems kind of simple. We can do that with eating as well, mindful eating. So like, again, like a mint, you can do all those things like, what does the wrapper sound like in my hand? What does it feel like? What can I, how does it smell? What does it taste like? All of those things really bring the senses back to a focal point. So instead of being all over here in my mind and worrying about everything that's going on, I'm now focused on one thing. And so that's a really simple thing. You can do that kind of like a guided meditation as well. Like, think of the beach. So use your 5 senses. Imagine you hear the waves. What do they sound like? Describe what's around you. So using those things can be fun. And little kids come up with really imaginative things.
That they do.
So it's always fun to get them to do it. Yeah. So you do it with them. You come up with your place, and then they do their place. It's kind of fun. The other thing too that's real simple, like if you don't have access to that, or you don't want to get up and move, or they can't even do that, just drawing. Just drawing and like, coloring, because again, that's a rhythmic, repetitive movement. So if you've ever noticed, that's why adult coloring books became so popular again too. I think people realized how calming and relaxing it is.
Yeah.
Plus it gives you a sense of accomplishment, right? When I feel out of control, but I can see what I just accomplished in something simple as a drawing or coloring, makes me kind of feel accomplished.
That's true. I've not thought of it like that, but that is a good point. Just giving them a simple task they can accomplish. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So other simple tasks like, hey, kids usually want to be helpers too. It's like, hey, can you do me this favor? Even with a teenager, hey, can you, I would really appreciate it, man, if you could help, your brother with this real quick. Would you mind taking this to them? Just giving them something simple to do. And little kids love, 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 love to be helpers.
What can parents do at home to create open communication?
It's always easier to start preventatively than it is to, have to be reactive. And so I think having those conversations, finding times when you guys are generally going to be together, or create fun kind of date night, opportunities, or family game nights. So I would say first, look at times that you're already together. So is that mealtime? Everybody kind of talks about the highs, and this is good with kids, kind of the highs and the lows of the day, right? So what was your proudest moment of the day? And I tend to say, instead of what was a weak point of the day, what was a challenge? Or what was an obstacle that you would overcome? Or asking the question of, what's a big thing that you really want to be able to do or feel better about, but need some support with? And asking those kinds of questions. And so I would say doing that during times when they already have, when you guys are already together, but then creating other space. So opportunities when kids feel more at ease. And so playing games is a little less direct. So when you're playing a game, Uno is a favorite, especially with younger kids. I like to do feelings Uno. So you can have them say, have them decide what color associates with what feeling. So red might be angry. If anybody's watched Inside Out, usually they'll say all the colors that match. Green could be jealousy, or it could be happy. Blue could be sad. And so then as you're playing, you can say, okay, well, as we put down blue cards, you have to name one thing that makes you sad, or one thing that makes you unhappy. And so both the adult and the student share what that is. And then I would say, like, when you're going out for ice cream, or creating just a natural space, car rides are also good because you're side by side. And it's non-threatening, right? You're already at each other's level. And so having those conversations about, even things that were challenging for you, or that have been hard for you, and how you've handled it. It's really okay to normalize some of that anxiety and for kids to know it's okay to talk about feelings. A lot of times parents think that they have to have it all together,
Yeah.
but the reality is kids, you're modeling behavior. And so even when you think you've messed up, you can take that as an opportunity to correct yourself and show them good conflict resolution, right?
Yeah.
Or frustration. This is how we manage frustration.
Yeah.
So having those conversations,
Yeah.
you know, creating space for connection first
Yeah.
and then having the conversation
Yeah.
is good.
I think that what you just said is huge, creating space for connection first, because I know, so I'm a parent of 2 teenage boys, otherwise known as people who don't want to tell you how they feel.
Right.
Right. So, do you find that the small things, just the more you can get them to connect about anything, will help lead to a better result when it comes to time to talking about the important things? Because I know as a lot of parents of
Yeah.
teens, you may say like, "What was at dinner? What was your favorite thing at school today?" And they say, "Oh no, I don't want to talk about it."
Yeah.
And you get that a lot. So, if you're a parent who's running into that with their child, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. Well, I think if they don't already feel comfortable,
Hmm.
and some things are going to be uncomfortable, that's just how it is. But if they don't have a baseline of just feeling comfortable in general, it's gonna be really hard to talk about these things.
Hmm.
So even as counselors, we have to spend time connecting first.
Hmm.
And so that might look like, you know, asking the student about something they want to talk about, or if you know they have a particular interest, so a certain video game, like tell me what level you're at in that video game, or how is that going, or join with them and say, hey, can you, then they probably will roll their eyes if you know they're a little bit older, but you can ask them to teach you how to play. So joining in activities with them is always going to be a good start first.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would definitely whatever connection points you can find, and then, you know, or a favorite show that you guys watch together, you know, and talk about that. Talk about the feelings associated that you see happening with the characters in that show, and then say, have you ever felt that? Or, you know, have you ever experienced what they did? Or I remember when, you know, I had to deal with something like that and it was really hard. What do you think you would do in a situation like that?
That's great.
You know? And so just using kind of those natural moments to have conversation.
So let's talk again about the people at church, the volunteers that may be working with kids or the ministry leaders. If you notice that a child seems to not be acting like themselves, or you start to notice that maybe there's something going on, how should they approach parents? Is it ever appropriate for them to talk to parents about that? And how would you do that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely appropriate because you're working with their child, they're entrusting their child to you. And I think, you know, a lot of times we all have blind spots, so we're not always going to see things, or our child might not feel comfortable telling us something, but they tell a trusted adult something. So that's the other thing in advance. I guess I'll answer your question, but in advance, I think, you know, talking to your kids about who their trusted adults are in their lives. So even with teenagers, this is a big one. Okay, I know you're not always going to want to come to me with everything, but let's talk about who is somebody that we can agree on, another adult that we can agree on that you can go to if you need to talk, but you can't tell me right away, right? Who is that? Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's the parent of another friend that you trust, right? Or somebody at church. So those are really important to set that up. Plus, that lets your kid know that, hey, my parent trusts me and they care about my feelings more than they care about being in control all the time.
Right.
But yes, I think it's very important to be able to talk to, as ministry partners, to be able to talk to parents. You never want to come at it as if you're diagnosing, even if you are an expert. You don't want to say, you know, well, this is what I'm seeing, because you're not working with that child in that environment. You're working with them in a church environment, in a more relaxed social setting. I never want to start out something with saying, I'm really concerned that, because automatically parents are on the defensive, right? Hey, I've noticed that lately such and such behavior has been happening. Just wondering have you seen that at all? Or can you help walk me through what you do when that happens? And is that how you'd like me to handle it if I see it happen again? Is there anything that I should know or I can do to be more supportive or helpful during our time? Because usually what you'll find out is that there's something significant that happened at home that they just forgot to tell you because life happens. right? And so then it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, and this might be helpful to know so you can support in this way. So asking those questions of how can I, support, or how can I help them have a great experience, or make it easier for them to enjoy being here or being active with the other kids. I also think the compliment sandwich, right? So you want to start with the good. You want to start with the good stuff. I really enjoyed working with Joey. I love the energy that he brings, when we're doing worship time together. And hey, I wasn't sure if you've been noticing, but we've noticed that, sometimes during lesson time, he'll maybe kind of push other kids. Just wondering if you've noticed that. And then ending it with, but I've also really, or saying I've also really noticed that, he seems like it's really hard for him to control that, but he wants to. So frame it into a positive.
How important is it when you're talking to parents to make them feel that you're not judging them? And what can people do to make sure that that comes across?
It's extremely important. Otherwise, people get defensive, right? Nobody wants to hear all the things we're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And parents, I mean, it's so cliche, but kids don't come with an instruction booklet when they're born. So you can have one kid and the next kid can be very different and almost seem like they're from different families. So I think it's really important to foster those connections with the parents and make sure that any opportunity you get to tell them about how much you enjoy working with their child, how much you or what the strengths are of their child, or when they've had a good day, going out of your way to say those things. So then when you do have to talk about, and again, it's like the same thing we talked about before, connection, right? First, having that connection, having connected and created a good relationship with the parents then allows you more access to be able to talk about the harder things.
Yeah.
And so just like with kids, it's really about relating and showing that you care first.
For parents, what are some signs that you may want to look at getting some professional help for them versus this is just something you can handle at home?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, again, it goes back to if it's something that's been lasting more than a week or two, usually that 2-week period, and it's significantly impacting those areas that we talked about before, academic, social, family can fit in the social too. Like suddenly they're just not engaging with family anymore. And or if they're older teens and they're working and you see like they've just been calling off and they're not showing up to work, or they're constantly showing up late, those can be signs, right? And so major changes in sleeping habit, and also changes in weight, poor physical hygiene, like refusing to take showers, refusing to take a bath. For younger kids, regression in certain behaviors. So sometimes bedwetting can be an issue.
Some of those things on the list are typical behaviors of children and teens. So would you say, like, for instance, teenage boys don't always want to have great hygiene. I have learned, having lived with 2 of them.
Right.
But
yeah.
So would you say,
I
the intensity level, or is that how you would tell this is a big problem versus something?
If it's just one thing, it's usually, yes, and you're exactly right, because a lot of these things can happen at different points in time. Yeah. But it's going to be typically if you're seeing multiples of these things happening at one time, right? So you're seeing significant changes and more than just a couple things are going, right? And you can't really attribute it to anything specific. So obviously, like I said, anytime we're going through major transitions or changes, like school being out and their sleeping is going to be off, because, we can't really, that's not a valid way to measure that, right? But if it's typical routine and all of a sudden that's changed, then that's not normal. Or you notice they've been getting up super early in the morning because they just can't sleep, right? Or they're complaining about nightmares. That's a big one. Frequent crying or complaining, increased complaining, more than just like, I don't want to do this, I don't feel like doing this, right? But like just complaining about the quality of their life. A lot of times I'll hear teenagers say like, nobody cares, right? I shouldn't even be here anymore because nobody would care if I wasn't here. Those are big concerns. Those are big things to pay attention to. Aggression, defiance can definitely be things. So if they're more irritable than they normally are, and maybe they're more detached, or it could be that the defiance is not just not wanting to do it, but it could be no motivation, right? And them not knowing how to tell you how they're feeling crappy, but they just don't want to deal with it. And then obviously withdrawing from family and friends. Teenagers a lot of times want to spend time alone in their room, but if you notice that that's all they're doing and they're not talking to their friends as much, or they're not wanting to be involved in activities and do fun things that they used to enjoy, that can definitely be a sign. Risky or reckless behaviors, especially for older kids, being more impulsive than usual, any kind of self-injurious behavior. I've seen this even in younger kids, like scratching, picking, a lot, to the point that it creates, small wounds. That can be an issue. And then, one of the things we don't want to miss is that, suicidal thought in kids 12 and up, and even younger, can happen, can be a thing. So kids that are, down, sad, kind of like depressed affect or depressed mood, in addition to maybe avoiding talking with their friends or wanting to do their decreased interest in usual activities, or talking about how it wouldn't matter if they were here anymore. Those are all definitely things to pay attention to. And a lot of times I've heard parents say, oh, don't say that. So many people love you, and just write it off.
Right.
Well, okay, rationally we know that, but that is not where they're at right now. That's not how they feel right now.
Right.
And so we need to meet them where they're feeling like they're at.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot from you. Don't write off anything. If they want to connect with you in whatever way it is, meet them where they are, right?
Exactly.
Invite that next question.
Yes, invite. Questions are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I'm not talking about like an interrogation type of thing, but really connecting on, validating that they're feeling a certain way and then asking more about it.
Yeah.
So, wow, that must be really tough. Like, can you tell me more, or can you help me understand what that looks like for you, what that feels like? I mean, if they're talking to you, you want to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. So if you're a parent and you notice and you do think your child needs some professional help, what resources should they turn to?
Yeah, so great question. If they're in school, you can always connect with a school counselor or school psychologist. And you can also, reach out to teachers and say, hey, have you seen any of this stuff going on? If you don't feel comfortable with that, reaching out to the school counselor or administrator. Youth coaches are great. Hey, would you mind have a conversation with so-and-so? Just to see if you're seeing some of the same things I am, or if they give you any more information. Reach out to that trusted adult or the other adults in your child's life that to see if they're observing things too. Don't be afraid to talk to other parents, because I think a lot of times we can feel like we're alone in things, and you can think you're going crazy or it's just your kid, but it's not.
Right.
And then I think, as far as other professional help, I think it's definitely good to reach out to your pediatrician. A lot of times physical things that are going on, nutrients and things that we might be deficient in, can look like mental health symptoms. So making sure that, when was their most recent checkup, and our medical things in line. And even if not, a lot of pediatricians will have counselors or child psychologists that they will recommend, that they collaborate with. And then also you can go to Psychology Today. There's a lot of resources there.
If you are a parent who notices their child is struggling, I think it's really easy to have a lot of parental guilt. Do you find that to be common, and what would you tell those parents?
It's extremely common.
Yeah.
Again, because I think we also live in a society where, let's be honest, it's no longer just keeping up with the Joneses. It's I have to look like I have it all together because everybody else has it all together
Right.
on social media and post pictures of their smiling family.
Mhm.
Well, you don't know what's going on behind that, right? I
Right.
think we can all say that, but it's very easy when that's all we're seeing to think
Right.
that's the reality.
Yes.
And so, first of all, limit your consumption of that kind of material because
Right.
it doesn't make any of us feel great, right?
No.
To compare ourselves to others. And so recognize that your child was given to you by God because God entrusted you to that particular child,
Mhm.
right? And so he knows that you are capable with his help to raise that child
Right.
and to raise that child and to be a healthy individual, right? That child also is going to make choices of their own.
Yeah.
They don't come out, they don't stay connected to us. You know, you cut an umbilical cord for a reason. They don't stay connected. And so it's very easy to want that to be the case, but that is not what it is. And so there are going to be moments that are uncomfortable as a parent as your child is learning and leaving the nest and you're letting them be a little bit independent with some freedom, but with a, safety net underneath. And that's normal. But I think in terms of the guilt piece, I hear a lot of parents say, what did I do wrong?
Right. Right. 'Cause parenting is hard. I don't know if anyone knows that, but parenting is hard.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong.
Right.
I mean, we add in all the things that are going on in our world in addition to normal development and struggles.
Mhm.
You add this pandemic on top of it. You add social media on top of it.
Mhm.
I'm so glad I didn't have a cell phone and social media to deal with when I was in high school because
Oh.
I would have been a mess.
Yeah.
So there's so many extra things that keep getting added on to our kids. And then as a result to parenting, right? And it's hard to know everything. You can't know everything.
Right.
And so recognize that there's going to be blind spots, that you're going to need support, and it's okay to ask for help.
Mhm.
It doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you much stronger when you know who your supports are
Yeah.
in your village, the village it takes to
Right.
raise a child, right?
Right.
And I think recognizing that sometimes it's okay to say, I'm doing the best that I can. Know who your people are. Have your own support network. And
Yeah.
I tell parents all the time too, especially that are going through some significant family things or trauma, right?
Mhm.
Do you have a therapist? Do you
Mhm.
have somebody you're talking to on a regular basis who is just there for you?
Yeah.
So that you can take care of yourself.
We all go through hard things, and if it's not your child who's struggling right now, if you can be that person for your friend, then drop what you're doing and be that person, because there will
Right.
come a time when you're going to need that person for you. And that's what I think.
Exactly.
I think that is the beauty of relationships, is that vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
piece. And we never want to be vulnerable, especially in today's social media age, but be vulnerable, people. Find some
Yeah.
people that love you in your ugly and that you love them in their ugly, because this is what life is about. It is about being there for each other in these hard times.
Yeah. Yeah. And celebrating with each other when
Mhm.
things are going well,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, there's a season for everything, right?
How important is faith in parenting and with reaching other children in your life who may be struggling with anxiety?
I think it's really important because we all need to know that at the end of the day, it's not always completely up to us or within our control, right?
Mhm.
And so recognizing that God has entrusted whatever it is in this season of life to us, right?
Mhm.
And that if we give him those things, if we give him our children, and if we give him those projects or those dreams and those hopes, and we ask him for his wisdom and his guidance, then he's going to help us and sustain us to get through those hard moments,
Mhm.
right? But that doesn't look like just praying the prayer and then walking away and not listening. It means listening.
Mhm.
It means having those quiet times with God and really listening and reading in his word and finding out what it is he wants to tell you that day about your parenting or about you as a person or about what he's doing in your life. And then it takes connecting with other people in your faith community and, in your church and your organization, to continue to remind each other of those things. Sometimes you just need to hear, I'm not a terrible parent. I'm not a terrible parent. Or,
Right.
you know, I'm doing okay, or I'm doing the best I can. We all need to hear those words of affirmation from each other. And I know that, you know, God has a unique plan for your child's life, and there might be some bumpy roads and paths. Think about your own life. Something I like to tell people is you've already made it through 100% of your hardest days. Some of those days might have really sucked, but right, you've been able to make it through. Your child doesn't need a perfect parent. They just need you as their parent.
That's good.
And yeah, and you doing the best that you can. Along with that is recognizing that self-care doesn't look like necessarily taking a bubble bath every night, because sometimes you just don't have time for that. Sometimes self-care is very practical, right? It's getting up and moving for 10 minutes. It's getting up and making sure you're doing your quiet time and reading your devotional. It's making some time to get that laundry done, because if you don't take the time to get those clothes put away, you're going to lose your mind. Right? It can be very small things, but prioritize what are the things that you need to do for yourself today. That's going to help you just feel a little bit more in control, and focus on the things that you can control.
Well, that is great. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today and helping us understand anxiety in our kids a little bit better and some of the things that we can do. So we just really appreciate
Yeah, no
that.
problem.